Welcome to a special episode of Holding All the Cards. My name's Daniel. I go by Kiramode on the forums. And today I'm going to talk about this pod right here, the new Chopper pod. Um, as people know, the intention of this show is to make players better, right? It's to take people who already know how to play the game, already been building decks, already kind of have an idea of what to do, and just go from losing to the best players at tournaments to beating the best players at tournaments, or at least feeling like when you sit down at a table next to them that you can beat them, and to lose that fear because you have the knowledge to go out and take them out. um, this episode here is not designed to make players better. As a matter of fact, watching this episode will almost certainly make you a worse player because the ideas presented here are going to be atrocious and bad for the youth and something that is just generally sinful. But without further ado, I'm going to give some of the ideas that I've been having with this pod. So, first, let's talk about this pod as it is. Um, just about every light side deck is either an aggro deck or it's a control deck. Almost all of them fit in one of those two molds. So control decks really care about long-term resources. They care about taking the force. They care about keeping their units alive, and they care about edge battles. Aggro decks really care about early game ramp. They care about blast. They care about either avoiding edge battles or just overwhelming with on the table edge. This pod doesn't help either of those two deck types. Um, the biggest problem it has is it doesn't have a main unit. It runs into the Ezra problem. Chopper he's decent, but he's still a chud. And the droid, it's like half a unit, if that. Like it's weak. It's worse than a Lothcat, to be honest. Electroshock Prod looks better than it is. I mean, like, it's nice on Zeb, just because Zeb can that extra gun. But the fact that you can't attach it to like a character really sucks. So you can't put it on Han Solo to give him a third gun, which is a bummer. And then improvised tactics looks better than it is. So the problem I have with improvised tactics is, let's assume best case scenario. Let's assume you have the droid in play. He only costs you one, and then you're going to improvise tactics to go get whichever Spectre you want. Spectres like Zeb and Kanan are overcosted to compensate for the fact that you can spark them in. Hera is okay at 3, but not phenomenal. I think Sabine's really good, and Sabine's really the case for using this card. But the problem is you're spending 3 resources plus 2 cards, and you shuffle a 1-pip card back into your deck. I mean, the Captured Courier droid has potential. Like, there could potentially be a deck that wants you to replay the droid over and over again just to get that discard. In which case, improvised tactics shuffling it back in the deck could be one day useful. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, shuffling a 1-pip card back into your deck sucks. So the price of getting a tutor is 3 mana plus 2 cards, plus you shuffle a 1-pip card back in your deck. I mean, at best, that's okay. At worst, it's just bad. So I don't see how you can realistically play this in like an honest, in an honest deck, because it's just there's not enough juice in here. There's no blast. Chopper's a decent enough force holder because he has 2 pips, but you can't build a deck around that. And then also, I don't like this objective. This objective is actually, it really bothers me because the wording is confusing. It creates situations where the rules can get broken, and also it's just not good. And this pod is very important to me because it has a lot of combo potential, and it has Chopper. And Chopper is my favorite Rebels character, and he's in my top 3 of all-time Star Wars characters, period. So I really want every card in here to be good, and the fact that this here, there's just no way that this card could ever be good kind of bothers me. Now, let's talk about what this pod does have. What it does have is one card that matters above all the rest of them, and that's Makeshift Repairs. So Makeshift Repairs, the way it reads, is search your deck for an enhancement, reveal it, add it to your hand. If your opponent has 0 cards in hand, search your deck for any card instead. That's fantastic. I haven't experimented with trying to get an unmitigated deck search, like you go search for any card. I haven't tried that yet. But the thing is, deck searches on light side in particular are incredibly restrictive. Han Solo is really expensive because he costs 4 and you have to get him off the table. Serenda's a little bit cheaper. She only costs 2, but you still have to get her off the table. You have Moma. He's actually a pretty well costed deck search, but he's limit 1. So there's limits to how much you can actually use him in a deck. And on top of that, you still have to pay for the body. So I think he's an efficient card because like his numbers on the card, like a tactics, a gun, and 2 health, and 2 pips, that's worth 2 mana, so the deck search is effectively 1 to put it into play. But sometimes you just need the card in hand to win the game, and paying 3 mana is just too much. You got the weapons deck search, which is properly costed, but it only gets weapons. And then you have the deck search with Rebel Kyle, which is way too restrictive. Makeshift Repairs is not restrictive. It allows you to just grab any enhancement. And it allows you to just put it in their hand as opposed to on the table. So if you wanted to get an enhancement like Advanced Proton Torpedoes, you don't have to worry about putting it into play and then whatever unit has it just dies. Like you can just hold it in your hand and wait until a better time. So I love that card, and that's the direction I went. Like I looked at this and I thought, okay, how many different ways can you use Makeshift Repairs to potentially break the game, and how much can these cards just not get in the way that much, or maybe even help a little? So I'm going to show 3 different decks that I've used with Chopper recently that I kind of have an idea of what they do. I know their strengths and weaknesses, and they're all going to be very meta dependent. So the first deck I'm going to show is how this functions within a mill deck. So pull these aside. The mill deck in Star Wars. I've been messing with this for a little while, and it has its pros and its cons. So at its core, there's 2 versions of the mill deck, and I'll explain both of them. This here is your standard easiest form of the mill. Basically, the way it works is these 2 cards are on the table. Leia is either on the table or captured somewhere, and then you have these 3 cards in hand. You would typically use Surrender to go search out for the other events to get them all quicker, but the main thing is once you have these cards, you're kind of in business. Now, the biggest issue that mill decks have had, in my experience, is the pods that run the cards you need for the combo, they just don't have resources. So you're kind of hamstrung in that sense. Luckily, this one is a 3 mana combo. Basically, I'll use these tokens as an example of mana because it's a cycle. So let's say Leia's captured somewhere. Let's assume you take the Force somehow at the end of your turn. Here's how the cycle begins. You would say, action, pay 2 resources for rescue mission, goes to your discard. So you pay 2. Leia comes into play. Trigger observation point, they mill 1 card. Pay 1 mana. It binds all things to get rescue mission back. Oh wait, let's put it like that. So you get rescue mission back. Then you say, funeral pyre, I'm going to sacrifice Leia, pull all the tokens off, these go back, and let's start the cycle over. Rescue mission, get Leia, that costs you 2 mana. Observation point, they lose 1 card off the top of their deck. It binds all things for 1 mana, that gets you rescue mission, and it binds all things back in your hand. Funeral pyre, sack Leia, these come off. You rescue mission, and you just do this until they run out of cards. It's a pretty simple combo, it makes sense, but it has structural problems. So the problems I had with this deck is like you just couldn't deck search for these. You also had trouble deck searching for Leia, so the events were easy enough to come by, but it just made the combo harder. So here was the direction I went. At the time, Chopper's Pod didn't exist. So I basically just stared at my cards for way longer than I ever realistically should. And I found a second mill combo. Now, this one's much more convoluted, and in all likelihood, as I'm talking about it, I'm probably going to forget some of the minute details of how this combo works. So the bigger version of this combo, luckily, a lot of the cards that are in the combo are already existent in the deck. So I mean, this deck, the rescue mission I'm using here is Kraken's rescue mission most of the time, and then you're already using Leia. So the only new pods you need to add Mirax's pod, and the reason is she comes with special discount. And then Kraken already comes with undercover, and you do need to add dash for holding all the cards. And then lastly, you need to use a card from Leia's pod, which is You're My Only Hope. So I'll go over how this version, I call this the event mill, how this one works to burn off your opponents of all the cards. So this one, Funeral Pyre and Observation Point are not in the deck. The way this works is you have two separate combos that are important to note. So your first combo is right here. It's a 5-card combo, and you start off with Leia captured somewhere. And here's what you do. You say start of the combo, you have to have force, just like the other one. Rescue mission, get Leia, that's 2 mana. It binds all things, that's 1 mana. Then you say You're My Only Hope on Leia. Pull the mana off. You're now drawing 2 cards. And your opponent discards 1, but that doesn't really matter. So next up, you say, it binds all things. Get my cards back. That costs 1. Rescue Leia. That costs 2. It binds all things. Get my cards back. That costs 4. And then You're My Only Hope on Leia. Leia gets sacrificed. These cards, or these manas get pulled off. And then you start over. You start off with the It Binds All Things. It costs 1. Rescue mission. Pull Leia. And then you have to It Binds All Things. So it's a little more involved just because you have to basically It Binds All Things after every single time you play an event in order to make sure that you can chain off more than one event at a time. So the first version of the mill combo, you had to only chain off one event. You just have to keep getting Rescue Mission over and over and over again. This time you have to get both Rescue Mission and You're My Only Hope. But it's the same deal though, right? You're basically just cycling Leia over and over again until you do what you want to do. So you have to do this combo until you eventually, what's it called? You're eventually going to run out of cards in your own deck, which is important. You want to actually run out of cards because once you run out of cards, it enables you to do a second infinite mill combo involving undercover, holding all the cards, and special discount. Now, there's a reason special discount is in here. The reason is you don't have enough mana. So in order to do the second version of the, In order to do the second version of the infinite combo, you have to actually, have 6 mana available. So special discount allows you to have less. So basically, you do the first combo as many times until you have 0 or 1 cards left in your deck. Let's assume for the sake of argument that you have exactly 1. You do this and then you have 1 card left in your deck, right? Also, at any given time at the end of the combo, after you sack off Leia, you sack off Leia with You're My Only Hope, pull all the tokens off, and then you say, It Binds All Things. That's how you start the combo, and you get 1 mana there. Now, in this case, you have to do things slightly differently. So basically what you have to do in this case, because you're drawing all the cards in your deck, what you have to do is you have to, I'm blanking on how you do this. One sec here. It's been a little while since I had to do the full event combo. Draw until the second infinite combo. And that's right. Okay, so at some point there's an It Binds All Things back in your deck, and you just use You're My Only Hope to sack Leia, right? So you have an open board of mana, and you have You're My Only Hope, and you have It Binds All Things back in your deck. So your deck has 1 card, and you have You're My Only Hope, and It Binds All Things in your discard, right? What you're gonna have to do in this case is you have to you have to use undercover here. So you play undercover, play it as a captured card somewhere, and you need to shuffle It Binds All Things back in your deck. So if there's one card in your deck, you just shuffle It Binds All Things back. If there's 0 cards in your deck, you shuffle It Binds All Things and any card. You could just shuffle your My Only Hope in. It doesn't really matter what you go with there. All right. From there, once your deck now has 2 cards in it, this is where you say, I'm going to play Holding All the Cards. So you now have It Binds All Things and You're My Only Hope back in your hand, along with the other rescue mission, It Binds All Things. At this point, because you've drawn your entire deck, you also have a special discount in your hand, and Holding All the Cards is now in your discard pile. Now, next step, you say Rescue Leia. Rescuing Leia costs you 2 mana, and she is on the board. Next up, you say, I'm going to play It Binds All Things to get Holding All the Cards and Rescue Mission back into my hand. So now it's just It Binds All Things in your discard. That costs you 3 mana. Next up, you're going to say Special Discount on Leia. Special Discount is key here because it'll reduce the cost of your next event by 2 mana. So you Special Discount on Leia. So you now have Special Discount on top of It Binds All Things. Leia's captured. A typical player, what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, I already have Undercover captured. I'm just going to place Leia and the Undercover together to make sure that you can't automatically rescue Leia. So at this point, this is where it becomes key. So we have a full board of mana, but we have 2 extra mana to work with here. So what you do here is you say, I'm going to play Rescue Mission, but it's free because of Special Discount. So at this point, you get one of the 2 cards. It doesn't matter which card you get. Next up, you say, It Binds All Things. I need my Rescue Mission and I need my Special Discount back in my hand. That goes in the discard. That is going to cost me 1 mana. Next up, you say Rescue Mission. Get the other card. So at this point, you now have a Leia and you have an Undercover. Undercover is going to be in your hand. Leia is going to be on the table. And from there, this is where you would then say Undercover. Let's shuffle It Binds All Things, both of them, back into my deck. And then you're going to say Holding All the Cards. We both draw 2. So you now have both of your It Binds All Things back in your hand. You from there say It Binds All Things, get Holding All the Cards and Rescue Mission back in your hand. That costs you a mana. And then from there, you have to Special Discount again to get Leia captured. This all comes off, and you start over. Actually, I think at this point, I'm trying to remember how you do this. I think you have to still It Binds All Things one more time, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, at this point, you have a full board of mana. You rescue Leia again, or one of them. That's free. Binds All Things, get your cards back. Costs 1. Rescue again. That costs 2. Then you would say, what's it called? Undercover. Get your cards back. Holding all the cards. Draw them again. And then at some point you would then Special Discount Leia and just keep going over and over and over again. Now, as you can tell, the event one is really convoluted. It's confusing, and it took me forever to figure out how to do it. And as you can see, even right now, I'm the person that made this weird combo, and it was hard for me to figure out exactly how this all worked. It's a lot of setup, and it's a lot easier to counter as an opponent, because basically what you're doing is the reason you want to keep doing this is you can keep drawing cards with holding all the cards forever, because you're using Undercover to just keep inputting 2 copies of It Binds All Things back in your discard at all times. So you're never going to run out of cards. Your opponent, though, drawing 2 cards at a time, will eventually run out of cards and automatically lose. But they now get to draw their entire deck, and they can potentially find an answer to whatever it is that you're doing. They can interrupt it. It's just not as good. But the reason I made this is because I needed a way to deck search every single card of the combo. And this was the only way that I could think of doing it. Like, I needed every part of the combo to just be events, because Surrenda could search out events. Chopper now makes a regular deck, or the one with enhancements, a little bit more viable. So If we go back to the not as insane version, you have Funeral Pyre, you have Observation Point, you have your 2 copies of It Binds All Things, you have your Rescue Mission, and you have your Leia. That's your standard mill combo. And then your key cards here are Makeshift Repairs and Surrender. Now, for this deck, because you are now going tricolor with the Chopper, I actually swapped out the Kraken Rescue Mission in place of the Rumors of the Cantina Rescue Mission, but it doesn't ultimately matter for this type of deck. But now you can search out every part of the combo. Makeshift Repairs can search out these 2 parts of the combo. Surrender can search out these. As a bonus, because you can search out Funeral Pyre early on in the game, it allows you to sack Surrender more easily, and then search out your other pieces until you get all the pieces in place. The only problem with this deck is that you just kind of run out of pod spots. So you have to play at least one Rescue Mission, and probably 2 Leias. You could swap out 1 Leia for Rebel Han Solo, but it doesn't really matter. So let's say you go 2 Leias, 1 Rescue Mission, 2 Binds All Things. You're at 5 pods, 6 with the Observation Point, 7 with the Funeral Pyre, 9 once you add Surrender. So you can only play Chopper as a 1 of, which is really just a bummer. Ideally, you'd play him as a 2 of, so you can, deck search these cards easier. But at some point, you have to make sacrifices. And I think it's more important to have 2 Surrenders than it is to have 2 of Makeshift Repairs, because Surrender can search out the Makeshift Repairs. So the key with this one is you have to be really judicious with Makeshift Repairs. Like, you can't play it until you've drawn one of these 2 already. That's the only sort of rule with it, unless you're just desperate. And obviously, there's a big counter to this, which the big counter to this deck is, what if somebody's playing Scum? What if somebody just captures 2 cards and now all of a sudden you can't freely grab Leia anytime you want? And my answer to that is that this type of deck is very, very meta-specific. But metas change, sometimes people just aren't playing Scum. An example of this would be at the top cut at Worlds. It just happened. There was no Scum there. Scum was almost non-existent. So if, let's say, this deck were consistent and it could consistently just always rip off this combo on Navy and Sith, then you would do great. You might be world champion with this deck. It's possible. You just need it to be the correct meta, and then this type of deck could absolutely work. I think what holds this deck back ultimately is that It Binds All Things really just sucks. The pod is not good. I like the objective is nice for holding the Force, and the Jedi Mind Trick is okay, but it really sucks that you have to play that pod, and it just limits what your deck is capable of, because everything else kind of works. The deck searches are obviously great. Leia does her thing. Leia brings card draw. This one helps you sacrifice for Surrender. She gives, Observation Point. If I draw it early enough, I'll just start losing cards off the top of my own deck to make it more likely that I get other stuff. And even the Rescue Mission pod has bonuses, but just It Binds All Things is pretty weak. However, I find this deck fun to play. I think it's cool to try to figure out how you can get the combo, how you can work out the draws in your head, and different potential ways to rip it all together. And this is always what I wanted, because I always feel like combo has more potential with enhancements than it does with events, because one of the problems with events is that you hold them in your hand. So if I draw and It Binds All Things turn 1, I'm only drawing 5 cards per turn because I have to hold on to this card. Worse, what if I draw both copies of It Binds All Things in the first turn? Now I'm only drawing 4 cards per turn. And in a deck like this, you want to be max drawing all the time. So the benefit here is, if I get Funeral Pyre turn 1, I just play it. If I get Leia out of the gate, I just play her, because she can be either in play or captured, and she does the same thing. And so you can just play, ideally you get these cards first, get them on the table, then get Surrender, and start getting your events, right? You get your on the table pieces first and all your events. The best version of this deck that will eventually come out is they're going to find a way to make It Binds All Things work in an event form, or as an enhancement, or they're going to find a way to make Rescue Mission work as an enhancement. Once they do that, that's when this deck type can really take off. For now, it's more of a fun deck, but it can get you more wins than you'd think, and it can really throw people off, and you can feel really clever when you play it. All right, so that's deck number 1. Let's get to deck number 2. So deck number 2 is a trench run deck. And the basic idea here is you want to use makeshift repairs, you want to search for the trench run, and you want to one-shot the trench run. Now, to one-shot the trench run, there are basically 3 win conditions that you have. Win condition 1 is advanced proton torpedoes. Win condition 2 is against all odds. Win condition 3 is dash plus holding all the cards. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit how you make this work with each one of your win conditions. The advanced proton torpedoes has the benefit of breaking the blockades in here with surprising maneuver, and you use your ships. So here's how the deck works. Basically, you need to get trench run early, so you have 2 copies of trench run, 2 copies of makeshift repair. You're going to get the trench run out. Ideally, you get either against all odds, which you have 2 of, or breaking the blockade, which you also have 2 of, in your opening flop. And what you have to do is you have to just find 2 ships that have pilots. Now, in this case, your pilots, you have 6 of them. You have the Gray Squadron Gunner, and you also have 4 copies of the Duros Smuggler. And they're cheap. He's 0, she costs 1. And you have some boats. I mean, like Breaking the Blockade has some ships. The Trench Run comes with 1 ship. She comes with the ship. And then also you have holding all the cards to draw it up. But basically, you get the Trench Run. You get your ships. You get your pilots on your ships. And then you get one of your 3 win conditions to trigger. And then you say, I attack. They block with whoever they're going to block. You play surprising maneuver, and you blow up all their ships, and you one-shot the trench run. And here's how all these work. Dash is the simplest. Basically, let's say they have 5 cards in hand. You send Dash by himself. They say blockers. You tap 2 of your ships that are in the back row with surprising maneuver. They all die. You play holding all the cards twice, and they lose. There's a little bit of flexibility here. I mean, if you have against all odds, like 1 copy or 2 copies, makes it easier to pop the trench run. If the trench run already has a couple damage, also makes it easier to pop the trench run. If your opponent has more cards, you maybe don't need 2 copies of holding all the cards. Or maybe if you have 3 copies of holding all the cards, they can have less cards in hand. I mean, there's flexibility here, but this is the simplest form of popping the trench run. The second simplest form is just against all odds. The way against all odds works here is just, do you have 9 characters? 2 of your characters are going to be locked down because you're using them with surprising maneuver. You could potentially untap one of them with breaking the blockade, but ultimately you just want a more strength in numbers type of approach, where this is where your rookie pilots start mattering, because there's a lot of shitty ass units in this deck that become useful with against all odds. You have the droid, you have the shifty lookout, you have the rookie pilot, you have the X-Wing, you have the dumbass ships that come in here. Sometimes a Gray Squadron Gunner, I play her on foot. Duros, if you already have enough pilots, it makes sometimes sense to put them on foot. You have Chopper. And if your board just gets big enough, you just send them all at the trench run and the trench run blows up. The one that's a little bit harder is breaking the blockade. Because breaking the blockade, the way this one works is you want the torpedoes. The torpedoes only work on fighters. So you have to play either on the ship that comes with the Gray Squadron Gunner, or you have to play it in the X-Wing that comes with the trench run. I found the easiest way to do this is if you just double up on the proton torpedoes, you're probably good. Because if you put 2 proton torpedoes on top of 1 ship, just that ship plus the 2 other ships that you have to use a surprising maneuver, that's 3 attackers. So that 1 attacker is going to have 6 bonus blasts. Throw in the fact that the ship already has at least 1 blast, so you're talking 7 damage. If you just have 1 extra guy, you now have enough to one-shot the trench run if you have 2 copies of advanced proton torpedoes, which becomes way easier to do when you have makeshift repairs. Like if you have makeshift repairs, it's not that hard at all to get 2 advanced proton torpedoes. And then in your desperation of desperation attempts, if you have breaking the blockade out, advanced proton torpedoes on an X-Wing allows you to double strike. It's the only unit in this entire deck that allows you to double strike, because this deck, it's just 5 2-ofs. It's 2 dash, 2 trench run, 2 advanced proton torpedoes, 2 breaking the blockades, 2 choppers. So you only have 1 unit that qualifies for breaking the blockade alongside the advanced proton torpedoes. But hey, you do what you got to do. I have tried one small change of this deck, and I've tried taking out 1 trench run and putting in 1 copy of Hobby. And my thinking here was you get a Rogue Squadron X-Wing, 2 copies of it, you get an extra pilot in Hobby, and then you actually get a resource along with card draw from the objective. The reason I wanted to do this was the X-Wing itself has built-in double strike. So what you could do is if you had like an X-Wing with the torpedo and you threw an extra pilot on him, he can by himself blow up the objective or the trench run. Then you throw in, you have an extra pilot, so sometimes it's just hard to find that last pilot to be able to trigger your combo. So having 1 extra copy of Hobby is nice. Having a stay on target could potentially be relevant. So that was one change, but the problem is you lose 1 of your trench runs. And losing 1 of your trench runs means that it might be just a little bit harder to find it, which means you might have to use a makeshift repairs that you don't want to use on the trench run to go find it, which means you're not using it to go grab the 2nd advanced proton torpedoes. So there's like sacrifices that kind of have to get made when you do that. But I think the Hobby version is a little bit better, but I wanted to show this one because this one's like, in a sense, the purest one. It knows what it wants to be, and it's all 5 2x objectives. And this one, you can't play it against Navy. But just like I said with the Scum thing, right? People find it hard to believe that Navy will ever not be in the meta. But there was a time when Core Sith was like everything that was played. Like nobody played anything that wasn't Core Sith. And people at the time thought it would be impossible that Core Sith would ever not be in the meta. In the same way that people now think it's impossible for Tarkin to not be in the meta. Don't be surprised if one day Moment of Triumph is just no longer a factor. And if one day Moment of Triumph becomes a non-factor, something like this could actually be relevant. Like, could actually really be a deck that becomes viable. I don't know exactly what this deck needs more of to be viable, other than it just kind of needs a more friendly meta. But my record with this deck, I actually have a winning record. I think my record with it, I think now it's like 7-4, which it's not the greatest record, but it's still a winning record. And for a jank-ass deck like this, if you can ever have a winning record with something like this, I think it's something to be proud of. Now, I have one last deck to talk about here, and this deck is actually the best deck among these cluster of decks. I made it just as a joke, and then I just kept winning with it, and I was really pleasantly surprised at how well this deck did. And I currently actually still have it built, so I can lay it out, because a lot of these other decks, it's like I have to kind of just like rip pods away from different pieces. This one's a like kind of a fully fleshed out idea for the most part. All right, so this one, you got 2 copies of Mission Briefing. You got 2 copies of The Brain. You're going to have 2 copies of Chopper, 2 copies of Sabine, 1 copy of Moma, and this is a flex pod. You can either go with Zeb, or you can go with Gamblo. I've been trying Gamblo recently, and I don't like him quite as much, but they both work. The basic idea of this deck is you have tutors, or deck searches, and there's only 1 card that you desperately want to be able to get, and that card is Heavy Blaster Emplacement. So, Heavy Blaster Emplacement, it's just, with Brainiac, hits another level. So you have 2 copies of Makeshift Repairs and 1 copy of MoMA. You can quickly get Heavy Blaster Emplacements on the table, and once you have Brainiac, this just hits obscene levels of effectiveness. So Brainiac can raise Heavy Blaster Emplacement up to 2 damage. So you can say, action, you deal 2 damage to one of your guys. It doesn't matter how much or which guy it is, because at some point they're just going to run out of space, right? At some point there's just going to be too much damage, and they're going to have to start assigning it to good units. When combined with the Battlefield Engineers, you just feel so dirty. Because what you do is you say, Brainiac raises it up to 2, deal 2 damage, declare the engineers as attackers, deal 2 more damage to one of your guys. And then, if you have the second copy of Heavy Blaster emplacements, Brainiac can do his action again on their turn, and you get more debauchery with the Heavy Blaster emplacements. There's also another source of damage here that has always felt kind of flimsy to me and only works in some situations. And that is the improvised explosives that come with Sabine. So, improvised explosives, for those that don't know, what it's, you attach it to an objective, and it says during an engagement you can sacrifice this enhancement to deal 1 damage to up to 2 participating units. Brainiac can make that 1 damage to 3 participating units or make it 2 damage to 2 participating units. Moreover, if you just have 2 of them, it's relevant. What I've noticed with the improvised explosives, 1 improvised explosive, not very good. 2 improvised explosives, your opponent just can't block anymore. And the reason is, dealing 1 damage to a guy, it doesn't take guys outside of blocking range. But if you have 2 copies of improvised explosives and you declare an attack, your opponent now just can't block with any chuds. Right? Any guy that has 2 health or less is just like unusable for that engagement because they're just going to immediately die. Moreover, you don't really want to send any 3 health main in there because now it's like, okay, if they take 2 damage, any like random gun just kills them, or a Brainiac reaction kills them, or a heat of battle kills them, of which you have 2 from the mission briefing. So you just don't really want to block, and that's very relevant when Sabine uses her paint job to make sure somebody has a lot of blast, namely herself. Brainiac has his astromechs, those guys deal damage, and you can kind of discard them to trigger Chopper's effect. Chopper's not super useful. That's why I tried throwing Brainiac or Gamblo in there to get the Gamblo Chopper thing going, but it hasn't quite panned out. But Chopper will still, I've noticed when you play him, he's good for 1 to 2 triggers a game, and that's really all you need. If you can get 1 to 2 triggers off a Chopper, that's huge because this is the bulk of the work done right here, but any little bit of juice you can get is good. So I've had times where like I have Chopper on the table and I have like one of these dudes, and I'll just be like, okay, improvised tactics, pay 2 mana. I'm going to go get the other version of him, put him into play, shuffle this scrub back in. I mean, you don't even need to have him into play, but the point is it'd be like a 2 mana force choke at that point, which it's not the most efficient use of a card, but sometimes you just need to get that little bit of damage in there. And one final thing, or 2 final things on here, is there's 2 cards in here that really let the deck breathe, and it's Signal Scrambler and the Junk Dealer. Because this deck does not have force holders, but because you're dealing so much damage with the Heavy Blaster emplacements, you're typically actually just going to have more units than your opponent, but they have better force holders. So you play Signal Scrambler. Now it's just whoever has more guys holds force. Very relevant. And the Junk Dealer is what allows the improvised explosives to actually be good. So the move that I have with the Junk Dealers is the Junk Dealer will generally be played early. The first copy of improvised explosive goes directly to your discard. It's worthless. You don't play it. Once you get the second copy, you actually hard cast the improvised explosives. Then you hard cast it from the discard to get 2 of them. And then once you get the second Junk Dealer, you can just every turn just throw 2 explosives on an objective and then just send the fleet to go take them out. Like you can send astromech droids to go finish off objectives. So when it comes to the flex pod of House Edge versus Zeb, it's a question of what do you care about more? Do you want to make Chopper a little bit more useful with discard mechanics, or do you want to just add more blast? Because Zeb gives you a little more blast, and a card like Improvised Tactics, while in normal decks, is just not a good card. In this deck, it's actually pretty good, because it gets you Sabine or Zeb, and in a deck that just has no blast like this deck does, I mean, you're so reliant on Zeb, and so reliant on Sabine, and so reliant on the astromech droids to push damage, that you're willing to overpay a little bit to go get one of your few guys that actually does have blast to just put in more work and try to blow up these objectives. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is the best deck ever. It's okay. It still runs into the moment of triumph problem, where if they bomb your board, you're just in trouble. But if your opponent gets off to kind of a weak start in terms of health of units, like if all they deploy for health of unit is like 3 health or less on their first turn, and you're able to get one of these heavy blaster emplacements rolling early, it can just steamroll way out of control because then your opponent can't deal with your crap. You just keep killing their guys, and eventually you're going to get Sabine because you have both her objective and you have Chopper's deck search to get her on the table. You're going to find the paint job because once you're done searching for these cards, you better believe that the makeshift repair is going to go search for that paint job. So you're going to get the paint job on there, and you're just going to start bombing these objectives. And then she comes with a well equipped, so she can double strike. It's just it's a fun deck that allows you to continually just put pressure on people in terms of damage, and just surprise people when you actually beat them with jank like this. So those are the 3 main decks. I've had other ideas with Chopper. A lot of them didn't work, but I think it's important when you see a pod like that that is clearly just not going to be good in standard decks. Even in Spectre decks, it's just not going to be very good. Sometimes a card that's as good as Makeshift Repairs can be the central point for a combo deck, or just a deck that's just like focused on doing one thing in particular. And you never know. It might be enough to spawn off its own deck types, because this deck could theoretically get made with the what's it called? The weapons experts. The problem is the weapons experts don't give you an additional way to deal damage. And the weapons experts also don't give you a way that once you've used their deck search to go find the heavy blaster emplacements, to go find other stuff like your paint job, like your armor, like the signal scrambler. Like there's just a little bit more versatility, and that matters a lot for a deck like this. So if you want to try one of these decks, be my guest. If you get worse as a player, it's not my fault. This has been Hole in All the Cards. Hope you enjoyed.